Hello and welcome to this ASPW Experience exclusive video. What I generally do is about a month and a half-ish before big trip, I will go through all my camera equipment and make sure I'm happy with what I'm taking with me. When I travel overseas, I've always got a weight limitation. I've got to think hard about what I take, what I will need, what I won't leave, you know what I mean, because I have to carry all my camera gear as carry-on. There's a weight limitation of that. So I've got to be very, very careful and very picky. To me, the most important thing about a rig when I'm traveling is it's got to be easy to get to. Really easy to get to. So I see something happening and I think to myself, oh, that would be a nice bit of the story. Whatever it happens to be, it might be something that's happening and might be gone in a flash. A train drives by or goes by, or there's an animal, or there's a bird, or there's something about to happen. I need to be able to literally just grab my weapon of choice and go and get it. So I have two primary cameras and I have two secondary cameras. I'm going to go to the secondary cameras first. The first one is the Insta360, it's called the Ace Pro. I'm looking at it because that is what's filming this right now. Right, I've just changed this camera. Actually, I noticed it was at 4K at 50 frames per second. I've changed it to 25 frames per second because this is low light. These small action cameras are lousy in low light. So I've basically halved, well, I doubled the amount of light for each frame by slowing it down from 50 frames, well, I don't need slow motion for this, to 25 frames. Those of you who are in North America, you're using 30 frames per second. We, of course, in PAL, we are at 50 hertz, so 25 frames per second, 50, 100. In your countries, your electric frequency is 60, so you have 30 frames, 60 frames, 120 frames. At the edit bench and viewing, there's no difference. There's no apparent difference, visual difference. So I've used 25 all my life, and I still use 25. It doesn't really matter what frame rate you choose, but if I, for example, took some old footage and inserted it in here, it would be filmed at 25 frames per second. If I now shoot this at 30 frames per second and then insert some footage at 25, in other words, its original frame rate was 25 frames per second, and I put it into this timeline, which is 30 frames per second because I'm shooting at 30 frames per second, that 25 frames per second footage will not be smooth. It'll have a little jerk. Every second it'll go. There's this in almost imperceptible but incredibly annoying little jerk every second as it tries to keep up. There is software available where you can get it done more smoothly, but it is never perfect. So 25 it is for me. Everything is shot on 25 frames per second. So that's the one camera, and I use that camera for anywhere where I want to mount a camera which is a bit odd on top of the car, on the bonnet, looking back, something underneath, looking at the suspension, that kind of thing. That is what that camera is for. Those of you who watched my show that I did with the guys looking for water in the desert, I had just acquired this camera, and at the time, it's a lovely show, and I've enjoyed making it enormously, but at the time, mentally, I was kind of, I just want to go and have a good time with the guys. I don't actually want to make a film of this, but I need to make a film of this because, well, I need it for income and to keep the Patreon, you know, because I had to do a minimum amount of videos for Patreon every month, and I thought, you know something, just take it easy, Andrew. Just use that camera and just shoot most of it. You know something? It worked really well because it was so easy to use. But the problem was sound. If the wind was blowing, the sound was lousy. So that is the track. There. That is the track that is on the map. So what we've got down, we've on the map. But it was so nice to use because it was so fast and quick and easy. So what I have now bought to replace the work done by that camera on that desert water trip for future trips is this guy here, and I've been using it a lot, and this is the Osmo Pocket 3, but I got it with the full kit. I'm not sure of the exact product name, but if I turn it on there, that's now turned on. All right, and you can see me, and if I press the screen down there, there, it's now looking at that, and I can record. That little orange thing is an ND filter, and then stop it. Now, the reason why this is very nice piece of equipment, it's very, very fast. I've got a decent screen, so if I want to shoot something, it's far easier to handle than that camera. That I would need a handle, I would need something to support it. So this is even easier than the Insta Ace. But the best part about this is, if I take that bottom part off and I replace it with, now what is so nice about these little DJIs, and honestly, it's taken a long time for camera makers to, it's a strange thing to say this, to understand how important sound is. The Ace thing has, the newer version has a module that improves sound, but as they stand, the sound quality is poor. And only DJI were the first ones to actually say, you know, sound is really important. So they invented this thing. It's that's an additional battery pack. Makes it a lot easier to handle in my hands with a long pack. But audio-wise, it comes with this little guy. So if you watch that screen there, I'm going to turn this on. So you see that there? That's the microphone. I'm going to turn it on. Okay, the little blue lights come on. And it's given me an indication up there that I've got 100% battery. So now, there's my microphone. There's my camera. There's my microphone. If I turn this off, the microphone is in here. Quite a nice little microphone, but with no wind protection. You can switch off. Basically, it's a low bypass. It bypasses low frequencies, and it gets rid of some, but never all, of wind noise. That is a good little wind muff on there, and if I was to be recording my show and I wanted to do something, I could clip that in there, just put it up there, and then I will be walking around with this, pointing it in various directions. Come on, turn around. All right. And I can blog, blah, 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 talk nonsense, blah, blah, blah. That is an amazing little thing. If I want to shoot for Instagram, I flop that over like that, and I press that. I've now got a vertical format for my Instagram, which is fantastic because I would not think about turning the camera around and things like that. This is the one that I also use, and I've done some tests in my last van video. I did some tests with this on the windshield. So I have a windshield mount, so when I'm driving, this is the camera that I'm going to be using. To turn it off, I literally do that, turn it off, and it automatically turns itself off and parks. It's a lovely piece of equipment, and I love this ingenuity in these products, particularly the wireless audio. No, there's nothing new about wireless audio, but it is so convenient. You just turn it on and it connects, and da-da, that's it. Then you turn it off and it disconnects. It is so, you don't have, see, when filming, you see something, as I mentioned, you want to be on top of it like that. You can't faff with equipment. If I now want to film something of a much better quality, I will use my two primary cameras and my two primary microphones. So I'm going to show you this one first. This you are familiar with because I have mentioned this before in my previous shows. It's my oldest camera. It is a Sony A7S III. It is a full frame sensor. I carry a limited number of lenses. I carry 4 lenses. Those lenses are, this one is the Zeiss. It's a 55mm 1.8. It has a Philip Bloom, he calls it a Bloom Gold. It's basic. It's not a soft focus filter. It is a I'm trying to think of the right word for it. It softens the images. You know, with 4K, I shoot everything on 4K. Skin tones tend to get a little bit hard because there's so much detail in the frame that it just softens it, but it doesn't make it out of focus. You know what I mean? And that I love using for, if I'm doing a story time, a talk to camera, I will put that on a tripod, and then I will use these microphones. Now these are old and I'm actually desperately wanting to replace them. These are the Rode Wireless Go. These are the first versions. The Rode were the first company to make really small, compact, high quality audio. I've got in my inventory of material, of equipment, I've still got 2 sets of wireless Sony microphones, and they're big things with big antennas and stuff, and they're very bulky, these. But these are becoming a little bit faulty. I'm having a few problems with them. They won't turn on or turn off as fast as I like, but they have served me very well. I do like Rode microphones. Big fan of their product. Generally like them a lot. So I will then use this lavalier microphone, which I will clip onto my shirt, and I will then plug it into this, which I'll put in my pocket, and rather this one, this is the transmitter, put this one in my pocket, plug the microphone into it, and then this gets mounted onto the camera. I'll show you how to do that now. And that is for something like presenting to camera where I don't want a lot of background noise. The general purpose, if I'm shooting just pick up, grab, but I want high quality, I don't want to use my mini cameras or the DJI, I will use this. So this is the Sony G Master 16 to 35 millimeter lens, f2.8. I use the higher quality lenses. The 2.8 gives me a shallow depth of field, which I really love, which you won't get with a cheaper lens. And also the color look, just the look, the skin tones, just the look is wonderful with these cameras. And I'm going to show you that now, but because I'm going to take that camera that I'm shooting with that now, I'm going to take it off the tripod and I'm going to replace it with this, and I'm going to shoot the rest of it with this, and you can see the difference between an action camera and a professional full frame camera. But I do want to mention this before I do that. This is my go-to microphone. This is the microphone that, now I've got what's known as a NATO mount. There's the NATO mount there. Okay, and I snap this on, all right, and I tighten it. I've now got a handle, I've now got a grip. The microphone goes in there. This is the Rode Video Pro NT, something like that. It's definitely got NT, which is their professional series. I have replaced the wind muff with a proper Rycote wind muff. The one supplied by Rode was poor. This is better. And so, because wind protection is vital for sound, it's so important. I cannot express that enough. So I'm going to swap this camera over now. Do I have a card in there? I do. I think it's got a fresh battery. Has it got a fresh battery? Let's have a look. I'm at 88% of my battery. I shall do that now. So, at the clap, cut to new camera. How does that look? Does that look better? This is the, as I said, A7S III. It is fantastic in low light. Absolutely remarkable in low light. This is the camera that I use when the sun goes down. This is always the camera I'll reach for, because I can continue shooting well after sunset, an hour after sunset. When I call it blue light, I think many people do as well. Where the world turns into it's a warm blue, if there's such a thing. It's a beautiful backdrop of sky, and you get the black trees against the blue dying of the day. And you light a little bit, and you put a bit of light in the foreground, and you have this magnificent background. This camera can handle that absolutely brilliantly. And that is why I absolutely love this A7S III. And they are not announcing a replacement. They've got other ideas, and I just love it. It's a fantastic camera. So now the camera that I just took off there, that is the Insta360 Ace. And what is very nice about it, it is by far the best action camera I've ever had. The flip-up screen is fantastic. So you treat it like an ordinary action camera by flipping it around the back. You flip it that way. You've now got a vlogging camera. It has a magnetic clip-on magnetic thing there. And again, because it's on a little tripod, it can be, I've got these are little Joby tripods which I use for this kind of thing. Where I need to put for example, this would be perfect for, and I'd leave it rigged like this in the car. I'm changing a wheel, repairing something underneath the vehicle. Grab this, put it on the ground, tilt the camera, turn it on, boom, I got my shot. I have had GoPros, I've had GoPro 1, 2, 3, 4. I think I then had a 6 and I had an 11. And I learnt through the years to detest and hate GoPros. They are so far behind in terms of picture quality, and especially in terms of the user experience. They are so far behind DJI and Insta. The inventor of the GoPro went through many iterations and then failed and failed and failed, and then suddenly they didn't fail with the hardware, they failed with the marketing. And when they started calling it Hero, it was the turning point for that particular brand. And suddenly everybody wanted to be a hero. And it just hooked. And it was a great little camera. I remember my very, very quick clip here. My very first shoot with a GoPro was in Angola in 2010. I had my friend of mine, Glenn Dell, who was a training captain for South African Airways, and we used to go flying planes together. He told me about them, and I said, please just bring me some. And he was in the States, and he bought one, and he brought it, and it was actually brought up to me, and the guys I met with at the Angolan border handed it to me in its box, and I opened it up, and it was wow. 10 to 11. So we have bets on how long it's going to take.
You know what it is? It's for when you light.
Yeah.
That's the nice one.
I think it'll be reasonably quick, but hour and a half. Any advance on an hour and a half.
And I've become very anti...
Coke can.
You get out the Italian flag in the background.
And it was shooting HD. Marvelous little thing. And I just went to town with it. And I shot, still, even today, the best sequence I have ever shot with the water sequence in the Kavango River with the ladies doing their washing. And I shot that with that little GoPro. about GoPros. My second camera is this guy. I also have this is a Smart Rig handle. The other one is made by Tilter. I actually prefer Tilter a little more than I do Small Rig. Generally speaking, I prefer their designs a little more. Not a big deal. Small Rig make very, very nice designs. Again, with a NATO rail, so if I needed to take this off, I could. Now, I would pack it in my kit like this. And then when I need to shoot something, snap that on and I'm ready to go. I'll get to this microphone in a minute. The lens here is not the lens. I don't take this lens on shoots when I'm overseas, only because it's a weight issue. It's quite a big heavy lens. It is gorgeous quality. It's a 1.4 24mm. I use another lens. Right, my other lenses. Now that is my most commonly used general purpose lens, and I generally have it on this camera, which is the A7R Mark V. This is my main still photography. It has a 62, if I'm correct, megapixel still image, so it's a huge still image that I use. So if I see a beautiful thing that I think, stills, this is for stills. If I want to videotape me shooting stills, I'll use one of the action cameras, but I will get my still images using this camera because it has such a big sensor. Most of the time I've got this lens, which is the 24 to 70mm f2.8 G Master. Being a 2.8, if I can open up that lens and shallow that depth of field, I will often do so. I aid that process by this. It's a variable ND filter from 2 to 5 stops. I leave it permanently attached because I'm shooting in daylight, bright daylight. I'm almost always going to want to reduce my light going through the lens, because when shooting video, ideally I will want to shoot under 1/100th of a second, ideally 50th of a second. But if it goes over 1/100th of a second, that's each individual frame, 25 of them per second exposure. If I want to do that, I will want to reduce the light to make sure that that frame rate stays below. If it goes above, then any movement will tend to be quite jittery and uncomfortable to the eye. So I will make sure that I slow that down. So I do that with that. And also I can crank that up to 50 frames per second, which is half speed. With the A7S III that I'm shooting on now, I can shoot 4K at 100, quarter speed, 1/100th of a second. So if I'm filming animals, birds, I will always shoot it at 50 frames per second, 50 frames per second. Let me not confuse you or me, because I might want to slow it down. Just that half speed, just an animal walking or a bird moving, it just makes it almost more real than it is in real life, to slow it down a bit. I don't use the quarter speed slowing down very often, but if there's a lot of movement, a lot of fast movement, butterflies, elephants splashing in water, stuff like that, where there's a lot of movement, I will then crank up that speed and shoot it at 100 frames per second. Now, the video quality, both of these have inbuilt camera processing. So generally speaking, camera processing, you want the camera to do as little processing as possible. However, and any professional video maker will say, you've got to shoot log, and I say to them, rubbish, you don't have to shoot log. Yes, sure, if I'm going to be shooting for Netflix, I'm going to shoot log, because that is the minimum amount of processing in camera and the maximum amount of processing post. Because in post I can control it. If it's done in camera, it's done. The image is cooked. It's no longer raw. Now, these cameras can export raw footage, raw meaning no compression, no processing at all, but to separate recorders. I don't want to do that. I'm not shooting for Netflix. There's no point in doing that. What I want to do is get the best possible image out of these cameras inside, in other words, internal processing. But I want to switch the processing down to a point where I'm sitting at my desk editing, I don't have to do hours and hours of color correction. I do color correction, a lot of it, but it's pretty simple and straightforward. Color correction on log is demanding, fiddly. To match shots is difficult. For a professional environment, it's what you want. I am a professional, but I'm not a professional, if you understand what I'm saying. If I was shooting for a different format, then yes. But as it is now, there is no point. There is no point in me shooting log. So what I do, to get back to my point, I set, Sony has a color palette, if you want. It's like a pre-filter called Cinetone. They use Cinetone on their big, really expensive cinema cameras. Lots of their very high-end cameras, they have a thing called Cinetone. Cinetone to me is and this is shot on Cinetone. What you're watching now, this is Cinetone. It's very kind to skin tones. It's good with blacks. It makes them black. It doesn't, they're not too grey. I'm getting a warning on that camera that I didn't notice. I'm going to just make a little correction. Since this is about cameras and things, I'm going to make a little bit of correction, and I'm going to crank up the ISO to, because I was getting a flash. You see, that's no good. That's now too much. Now what I'm actually doing is I was getting a warning saying your shutter speed is lower than 25 frames per second. And if it's lower, you will get the opposite. There you go, it's at 100. That's probably perfect. If it goes lower than 25, then what happens is the movement isn't smooth. It's a bit blurred between the movements. If it's too high, it's jagged between them, because each frame is absolutely sharp. Whereas if it's too slow, each frame of the movement part of the frame is slightly soft, not overly sharp, but slightly soft. So getting the shutter speed right is kind of important for the look. At the moment, it's shooting at 1/60th of a second, which is absolutely perfect, at 2.8, fully open, at ISO 500. So this is perfect. So while I'm filming, I'm constantly kind of making a little change, yeah, that's good, and go. And I've set up the camera so I can do this really, really quickly. I don't have to do it every time I'm turning the camera on, but I do it quite often, and because the light changes, obviously, evening, light, midday, and everything. The light is changing, the conditions are changing. Therefore, I have to tell the camera what to do. You could say, why don't you put the camera on auto? Because the camera doesn't know. It guesses. I know. I'll give you an example. If I put it on auto, it will do a magnificent job 90% of the time. But that 10% where it doesn't do a good job is where you really need it to do a good job, and it won't. For example, really early morning, the sun hasn't come out, and I'm climbing out of my tent, and the sky is this amazing blue, and the sun is just starting to, it's going to hit those trees, and just the world is going to explode in this shower of orange. Well, if you have an automatic, the camera goes, if the camera had a brain, it would go, crikey, gee, that's very orange. I must be inside. Therefore, I'll assume you're inside and you've got incandescent lights, and I'll correct it. So that beautiful, magic, orange gorgeousness, gone. Shooting still is different, because if you're shooting raw, it doesn't matter. It's raw. It's properly unprocessed. It's raw. And you have all of that latitude in the editing software I use Lightroom and Photoshop. All of that, you have all of that power over the image because it's raw. Video is not raw. It's pre-cooked to a point, as I mentioned earlier. And because it's pre-cooked to a point, I have limited ability to change it. If the camera has cooked in the wrong white balance, i.e. it thinks I'm inside and it corrects it and my orange is gone, I can get a little bit of it back, but I cannot get the magic back. It's gone. It's cooked into the image. I never, with any of these cameras you see here, use auto white balance, with the exception of if I'm inside a building. Otherwise, I turn it off. It's default off on all my cameras. And if I'm walking inside a building and I look around and think, well, there's a fluorescent, there's an incandescent, there's some natural light coming from outside, auto white balance, good, go. And generally it'll also auto white balance tends to make things a little bit too cool for my liking. It strips the warmth out of skin tones a bit too much. You can manually, now a lot of you guys will say, well, manually do it. You should, if you are a professional filmmaker, you should manually set your white balance every time. Yes, you should. And if you're doing multiple cameras to get them to match, you manually set your white balance. So you figure it out, you use a gray card and you work out the exposure with the gray card, and then you use a white card for your white balance, and then it'll tell you, and then you set it typically outdoors 5,600 Kelvin, and then you go around and you set all your cameras to 5,600 Kelvin. That's what I've done. I've set all my cameras to 5,600 Kelvin, which is outside, and they're all exactly the same. Will they match? No, they won't, because the processing is different. The CCD is different. Everything about them is different. The lens is different. It's not going to be the same with different cameras. However, with that camera and this camera, both set on the same white balance and both set on Cinetone, I get as close as, damn it, to exactly the same. There's a slight difference because, well, this lens, for example, this is the 1.4, it's got a slightly warmer hue, slightly, just a little bit, than our other lens. Not going to be identical. That's the little bit of, I use editing program called DaVinci Pro, Blackmagic, DaVinci Pro, it's an editing program. The color correction qualities of that is brilliant. I'm going to do a little rant here about editing software. No, I won't rant. It's not a rant. I've used, all right, now I could show off here. I've used them all, including things like, I used to edit on 35mm and 16mm. I edited 16mm documentaries on Steenbecks and things like that. And then non-linear, I started with Media 100 and Final Cut Pro. And Final Cut Pro for 4 years was really, really good. That's Apple's thing, really, really good. And then then they changed the Final Cut Pro format and made it look like iMovie, which I hated iMovie. It was terrible. The user creative interface was just forget it. So I tried Adobe Premiere, and I used it for 2 years, maybe 3 years. Premiere is terrible. Premiere is really bad, and it's a professional editing thing, but it is so bad. And I say it's so bad, it's actually not that bad. But when compared to DaVinci Resolve, it's a heap of pig droppings. They would twice, 3 times a year upgrade, and I'd go, oh God, no, not another upgrade, because they would change fundamental locations of commands. You would have to relearn the whole software twice a year. Eventually, when they did something with titles, you use a title, in title. So DaVinci, you want a title? Click, title, drag it in, click, type what you need, make it this big, make it there, and put it in that part of the frame, done. Okay? I have made 4 clicks, and it's finished. DaVinci, you had to go through 3 different layers just to get to, I want a title in my... And eventually that was the turning point where I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going to allow you to frustrate me like this. And I got the free version of DaVinci Resolve. I used it for about 6 months, the free version. And then after a while, the free version wasn't doing enough for me. I needed more power. And it was $400+. I bought the paid version, paid for life. Compared that, you pay that almost every year with Premiere. I pay that once, I've got it for life. And I probably, since I bought it, I probably had 6 or 7 upgrades. And you know the upgrades? You can't tell that there's an upgrade except, oh, that's interesting, I can now do this. But the fundamentals, unchanged. It's brilliant. Okay, cannot speak, and I've had a few issues with it. Their support, unbelievable. Unbelievable. Same day you get a message back asking you a question. You can resolve it in a day. Any issues? Really remarkable. Right, back to cameras. This camera is my go-to general if I'm shooting wildlife and general stuff. This is the camera I will use. That's the A7R5, as I mentioned. I'm going to talk about 2 other lenses that I use on my trips. This one is a 90mm f2.8. I use it. It has a wonderful look about it. I carry it because it is also macro. So that is my macro go-to lens. This is like $1,000 and it is remarkable. It's not the G Master, but still for video it is fabulous. I use this lens now as a 70 to 200mm. I'm going to quickly talk about zooms and primes. Now this lens, of course, this is a 55mm. That's what they call a prime lens. In other words, it's a fixed focal length, as is this one, the 24mm 1.4. These are prime lenses. Prime lenses are nicer quality than zoom lenses to the point where you would struggle to notice the difference, but there's a certain look about a prime lens which is just nicer. It's not noticed by people who are not photographers, I don't really think. So big movie productions and everything like that, they will often use prime lenses, and because they just have a look about them. With shooting video, because the nature of shooting video is, okay, and you jump out and you don't know exactly how it's going to look on the frame. You don't have time to set it up and say, okay, there's my crop, okay, what lens, yeah, okay, I think let's get a little bit closer with the wide angle, let's put the 24 in there, and okay, this is nice, now get a bit closer, oh, no, that's nice, okay, oh, beautiful, that's stunning, okay. That's prime lens talk. When you're shooting video, I don't know what is going to be demanded of this. What am I going to need? I'm not actually sure until I get there. And because it's happening now, I need to make decisions fast. I don't have time to set up. I use zoom lenses because you then, okay, you can sit in the same point, pull back, and get your cropping right. So that lens then is it's a 70mm to 200mm. So it's a medium telephoto zoom, but it's a 2.8, which means it lets in lots of light, which means I can shoot with the A7S III. I can shoot well after dark with a long focus lens. The images are beautiful. This lens is just glorious. It is just, the images are just, this is the great thing about making film, telling stories and things like that, is that when you get an image and you go, oh, it's so satisfying, and equipment is part of it. And again, I've got exactly the same thing. I have got a ND filter, variable ND filter on the front of that. Because if I'm shooting in very, very bright light, again, I want to keep that shutter speed below 100th of a second. And I'm going to need to do that, because if I want to open the lens, because I want to get the shallow depth of field, it's just too much light. So I have to reduce the amount of light. I use an ND filter. So that is a lovely piece of equipment. I had the 100 to 400 Sony lens that I shot. I used that on my 2018 expedition. That was the when I went with Jeremy and we saw lots of elephants and things. That was in 18, I think it was called In Search of Close Encounters. And I used the 100-400, but the trouble is with that lens, I fought with it the whole time because the image stabilization wouldn't work with video. It would only work with stills. It's supposed to work with video. The first one I had didn't work. I sent it into Sony and they sent it back and said, we've repaired it. And I sent it back saying, there's no difference, it doesn't work properly. And they then sent me a brand new lens. And it still didn't work properly. My second one still was not faultless. I also thought, though, that 100-400, it was 5.6, whereas this 2.8, 70-200, I'm getting less magnification, but I'm getting that ability to shoot much later. So, again, it's a balance. So 200 is not really enough to shoot a lot of wildlife. 400 is kind of ideal. So I thought to myself, well, okay, well, it is a compromise because I have to compromise because money, space, weight, everything. What's the best compromise? So the A7S III can shoot 8K video. Only at 25 frames per second, not at 50, but still. I can then mount this, which I did in Namibia when Jeremy and I last year. I used this, shooting 8K with this, and I got some lovely results. It's not ideal, it's a bit of a compromise, because I would have preferred to shoot animals at 50 frames, but I can't at 8K. So I would shoot at 50 frames, but then I wouldn't be at 8K, I'd be at 4K, and then I could use either of my cameras. So there's a bit of a compromise there. This, though, the image stabilization with this is fantastic, outstanding in it. And I used to curse, with a 400mm, I'd get a lovely shot, but because I wasn't on a tripod, it would be a little bit shaky, and it's too shaky. You can stabilize some shakes in post-production, but it's never particularly effective. If there's a lot of movement, it's terrible. If there's a little bit of movement, it can iron them out a little bit. But honestly, again, the most you get your footage out of the camera as best as you possibly can with the least processing in it as you possibly can. So in post-production, you're doing as little as possible. That's kind of the way I think. Another thing I haven't mentioned, and it's very, very important, if you're shooting, these cameras, these action cameras, have built-in sharpening. I turn mine right down to the minimum, to the absolute minimum. I do not want those cameras sharpening my image because it looks awful. It's fine on a screen this big. It's absolutely fine, and that's what its default is. You'll watch it on a phone. I'm watching mine on a huge screen. I turn off that sharpening, minus as far as it'll go on all my cameras. I do not want in-camera sharpening. If I need to sharpen, I can do it in post. But of course, if you do it in camera, it's cooked into the image. You can't remove it. Okay. Right, the last thing is this microphone here. It is permanently mounted to this arm. This is the Rode Stereo X Pro. Now, those beautiful scenes that I shoot where I've got, you would remember them, for example, Friends Cross the Canning, the butcher birds. So I'm filming the butcher birds. I've got the camera, the butcher bird, and I've got a microphone, and I'm talking to me, I'm talking to I'm looking very David Attenborough-ish and everything, and the sound is being picked up by this remarkable stereo microphone. All right. Good morning. No trip for me into the Australian outback is complete without this. I'll try again. This I don't just get tingles down my spine, through my arms, legs, the works, every bit tingles when I hear that sound. The sound quality is glorious for such a compact microphone. And whenever there's an ambience, a fullness, where I'm trying to create an audio stage, a sound stage, all right, I'm using that. Remarkably good for audio, for voice as well. So if I do a talk to camera and I do use that, it's remarkably good at separating that as well. So that, of course, has its own wind protector, and it is very effective, very effective. So I can trust, actually need to give this a wash because it's actually looking pretty terrible. So that there is my go-to grab camera. I'll get fantastic audio and I'll get fantastic video out of that. It's quite a heavy thing. I put these plates on the underside of them, and for my various tripods I can just snap them into place. The last thing I wanted to mention was this guy here. Now this is a monitor that I can fix on the top of any of my camera handles, and I use this in studio. I would normally be using it right now if I was shooting in the studio right now. Instead I'm using the camera's own. So this one, like the A7S, has got it's got a little, you see that there, all right. So if I'm doing vlogging like I am now, I just open that up, and while I'm shooting in the bush, it will suffice. Not nearly as good as having this on top of the camera, but this requires a big fat battery, a big fat charger, big HDMI cables. It's just heavy, cumbersome, and you know, these little things, these little flip out screens, they do the job. Reduce weight, reduce complexity, use those. They work very, very well. The last thing is I carry a box like this, and in this box, cables, lens cleaners, a whole lot of cable ties, all kinds of, you name it, just in there. A little tool set. I don't put that as camera carry on, because whenever I do, they take my tools out and keep them. As if I'm going to dismantle a 777 using a tiny little watchmaker screwdriver. Okay, but that's happened to me more than once because I forget. That is the rundown of my camera equipment. So you guys who are part of the experience, I'm going to be doing a show soon on the I'm going to be doing a live show on either South Island or Kokonya Island. These are in the Okavango Makadikari, and I'm going to be doing some live shows directly to you. So and when we do them, I'm going to be using this guy. That's going to be my live camera thing. Again, I could use that, I could use the other. I get a slightly different, better picture quality, but then I'd have to take this thing down here. Can you see that there? I'd have to take that, which is a live streamer, which carries the HDMI current. I'd have to take a power supply for that. I'd have to take a whole lot of other cables, and at the end of the day it would be, well, I hope to hell it works. But this, together with the Starlink, obviously, one cable, I've tested it, long HDMI, there's a USB-C 3 cable, and that will be my equipment that I will do the live shows. This has got a little follow camera which will follow me around. The cable isn't that long, but I can at least walk around and you can have a look at the vehicle, and you can have a you can get the gist of where I will be, and then you can join me at my camp in remotest Botswana. That will be happening in late April this year, so you can look forward to that. I am so excited about my Africa trip, and I, as I said, do this a month or so in advance, because now I'm just getting so pumped up for that trip. What am I going to find? What am I going to film? What stories am I going to tell? I don't know. It's just a fantastic thing that I do every year. I go to Africa and find some amazing places. Thank you for everybody watching it. I hope this has meant something to you. Comment on the thing below and in the virtual chat. Tell me what you think. And don't forget, tell me more of the stuff that you want to see more of, so I can understand. Until next time.